Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1879. The wind carried the first bite of winter when Penelope Easton sold her mother's wedding ring for a sack of flour and a few bruised apples. She stood outside the general store in Rawlins, her fingers wrapped around the flour sack like it held her life, and it did. Her boots were worn through at the toes, skirt frayed at the hem, and her cheeks hollow from weeks of eating too little. Her daughter, Daisy, just 5, clung to her side without a word. Her younger boy, Daniel, barely 3, slept in the sling across her chest, his breath light and shallow. Penelope had not eaten in 2 days. The children had been given the last of the potatoes 3 nights ago. There had been nothing since. She had come to town with the ring, knowing it was the last thing of worth she owned. The man at the counter looked at her like she was selling air, but he still took it, and now she had flour. Enough for a week, maybe. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered to Daisy, brushing a hand over her daughter's tangled hair. "Let us find somewhere warm." They walked along the boardwalk, passing faces that glanced, then looked away. No one offered help. No one met her eyes. She didn't expect them to. People had their own burdens to carry. But one man did stop. He was leaning against the post outside the livery, arms crossed, hat pulled low. His clothes were plain and dusty, the edge of his coat worn thin, but his boots were clean, and his horse in the stable behind him looked well fed. He watched her walk with slow, quiet eyes like he was used to watching more than speaking. She kept her head down, urging Daisy along. "Miss," he said, voice low and rough like it had not been used much that day. She paused, too tired to be polite, too proud to ask for anything more. "You and your little ones got somewhere to sleep?" he asked. Penelope straightened. "We do fine." He looked at the flour sack and then at the boy sleeping against her. One brow rose just slightly, but he said nothing more. "I said we're fine." He nodded once, but he did not move. "Name's Kellen Hart." She did not give hers, just walked past him, headed toward the edge of town where there was an abandoned rail shed she might tuck them into for the night. It was not safe, but it had a roof. That night, she made a fire from scraps and boiled water into a thin, tasteless paste with the flour. Daisy cried when she saw it, her tiny hands pressed to her stomach. Penelope shushed her and fed her slowly. When Daniel woke, she fed him too, then sat against the wall and cried after they were asleep. The next morning, someone knocked on the rail shed door. She grabbed the iron rod she had kept beside her and stood quietly. "It is me," came that same low voice. "Kellen." She opened the door a crack. He stood there holding a tin box and a folded blanket. "I ain't asking for anything," he said, not looking straight at her. "Just thought your children could use this. You can throw it out if you want." He set it down and walked away before she could answer. Inside the tin box was cornbread, wrapped in cloth, and a bit of smoked meat. The blanket was thick and warm. She fed the children first. The cornbread was fresh, still soft. She waited until they were full and asleep before she took her first bite. It brought tears to her eyes. She found him again 2 days later. He was at the livery again, brushing down his horse, the same quiet look on his face. "I never gave you my name," she said, arms crossed, Daniel on her hip and Daisy by her side. "Penelope Easton." He nodded once. "Ma'am, I do not want charity. I did not offer any." She blinked. "Then what do you call that food and the blanket?" He shrugged. "Kindness." She opened her mouth, then shut it. He did not smile. He did not ask questions. He just looked at her with that same steady gaze, like he had seen enough sadness to recognize it but knew better than to pry. "You live here?" she asked. "Outside town. Couple miles. Got a cabin. Small." She looked down at Daisy. The girl's cheeks were red from the cold. "You offering it?" "I am." Penelope hesitated. Why? He met her eyes. Because no one should have to sell the last thing they own just to keep their children alive. The words caught in her chest. She swallowed hard. That evening, she followed him out of town. He had a mule cart and let her and the children ride. The road was quiet, the sky wide and orange with dusk. When they reached the cabin, it was simple, a one-room log place with a stove and a bed and a cot. Clean. Warm. I can take the cot, he said. You and the little ones take the bed. I can sleep on the floor. He shook his head. No need. They settled in. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat by the fire and watched him. He whittled a bit of wood, careful and silent. You always this quiet? She asked. He glanced up. Most days. Why? He looked at the fire. Lost my wife 6 years ago. Been quiet since. Penelope nodded. I lost my husband 2 years past. Fever took him fast. I am sorry. Me too. They did not speak much after that, but something had shifted. Something small and warm that had not been there before. The days passed. She helped with chores, cooked, cleaned. He brought in firewood, hunted, made sure the children had what they needed. He never asked for anything, never crossed a line, but he was there. Always. One morning, she found Daisy in his lap, giggling as he carved her a small wooden horse. Daniel sat at his feet, watching with wide eyes. Her heart ached at the sight. Later that day, she stood beside him while he worked outside, fixing a loose board on the fence. You are good with them. He shrugged. They are good kids. She looked at him. You do not have to do all this. He met her gaze. I want to. She did not know what to say to that. But that night, when she lay in the bed with the children nestled close, she looked at the cot where he slept and felt something settle inside her. Something like peace. Something like hope. She had sold her last possession for food, and a quiet cowboy had offered his heart in return. The first snow came in the night, soft against the cabin roof, blanketing the world in silence. Penelope woke before dawn, the children warm beside her, their breath damp against the quilt. She stepped carefully from the bed so as not to wake them, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. The sky was still dark, but the snowlight gave everything a pale blue cast. Smoke trailed from the chimney. She could hear Kellen splitting wood behind the cabin, the steady thud of his axe breaking the stillness. She followed the sound, boots crunching through the powder. He looked up when she appeared but didn't pause. You always start your mornings like this? She asked, drawing the shawl tighter. Only when it snows, he said, setting another log on the stump. Wood burns faster in weather like this. She watched him work in silence. His movements were unhurried, purposeful. He didn't speak just to fill the air. After a while, she asked, You build this place yourself? He nodded. Took 2 summers. Hauled the beams down from the ridge. A neighbor helped with the roof. Looks solid. He didn't answer, just split another log and set it neatly on the growing stack. Penelope bent to gather a few pieces. You always live alone? Used to have a dog, he said after a moment. Died last year. Since then. Yes. She glanced at him. You don't seem to mind it. I don't. Not most days. They carried the wood inside together. The warmth from the stove curled around her legs as she stepped through the doorway. She set the logs near the hearth, brushing snow from her skirt with the edge of her hand. That evening, after supper, Kellen pulled a rolled map from a shelf and spread it across the table. I've been thinking, he said, tapping a spot with his finger. There's a small schoolhouse 4 miles east. Teacher left last spring. They've been looking for someone to take it over. Penelope leaned over the map, careful not to disturb Daniel where he dozed on her lap. You think I should go? I think you'd be good at it. You read, you write. You're patient. She studied the map, then looked at him. Why re you suggesting it? Kellen didn't meet her eyes at first. He rested his hand on the edge of the table. I wanted you to know you got choices, he said finally. You don't have to stay here unless you want to. A silence settled between them, heavier than before. The fire popped in the stove. I didn't come looking for a new life, she said quietly. I was just trying to keep them alive. I know, but it's starting to feel like maybe there's room for more than that. He looked at her then, not with pity, not with caution, but with something steadier, something that had been there all along, waiting. She gazed down at Daniel, his small fist curled against her apron. I'd need to take them with me, she said. Of course. And I'd need someone to help with the travel. For miles isn't far, but not with little legs and a cart. I'd take you, he said without pause. She traced the route on the map with her finger, then let her hand fall away. Let me think on it. Kellen gave a single nod. No rush. That night, after the children were tucked in and the fire banked low, Penelope sat on the edge of the bed and turned over his words in her mind. He hadn't asked her to stay. He'd offered her a path forward and left the choice to her. She rose quietly and crossed to the window. Snow still fell, thin flakes catching the firelight behind her. Out past the trees, the world was wide and waiting. Behind her, she heard the soft creak of the cot as Kellen shifted beneath the quilt. He didn't speak. He never did unless it mattered. She turned from the window, her heart steady, and lay beside her children. The cabin was small, but it held more warmth than any place she'd known in years. And somewhere in the quiet, she knew the shape of her life was changing. Not because she'd planned it, not because she'd asked for it, but because a man with quiet hands and a steady heart had made room for her in his world, without asking for anything in return. By late December, the wind had stiffened into a constant presence, sweeping across the hills and rattling the shutters on Kellen's cabin. The snow outside had crusted hard enough to carry a man's weight, and the creek near the stand of cottonwoods had frozen clear through. Penelope stood near the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, kneading dough slow and steady. Her hands had grown stronger in recent weeks, the skin roughening, the muscle returning. Daisy was humming to herself on the floor, drawing crooked animals in a corner with a piece of charcoal. Daniel napped close to the fire, his breath soft and even. Kellen came in with a gust of cold, arms full of kindling and a faint flush on his cheeks. He stomped snow from his boots, then set the bundle in the corner. Penelope glanced over her shoulder. Your cheeks are near purple, she said, brushing flour from her hands. You been out long? He unwound his scarf. Took the long way back. Spotted some tracks I didn't recognize. Could be wolves moving through. She wiped her hands on her apron. Close. No, just west of the ridge. They won't come near the cabin unless they're hungry enough. She studied him a moment. You always know where everything is? I try. She nodded once, then went back to the dough. Silence settled in again, comfortable as worn leather. He moved to the table, pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket, and set it down. This came by rider. Passed through town yesterday. She stopped kneading. For me. Addressed to your name. From Cheyenne. She dried her hands and opened the letter carefully. Her eyes scanned the page, lips parted slightly as she read. Then she read it again, slower this time. He waited. He always did. My sister, she said, folding the paper. She's alive. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. Thought she might have. Her voice caught. She cleared her throat. She's working as a laundress now. Says she's got steady pay and space in her boarding room for the children and me if we want it. Kellen didn't move. She says the city's grown. More chances for work. Daisy could start school there. He looked to the floorboards a moment, then met her eyes. "Do you want to go?" Penelope stared at the stove. "I don't know. It's a good offer." "It is." He didn't say more. He didn't try to sway her. That night, after the children were in bed, she stood by the door, arms wrapped around herself. Kellen sat near the hearth, sharpening a blade with slow, even strokes. "She used to be the strong one," Penelope said without turning. "Could talk a man off a roof or into his grave, depending on what he deserved. We were close once. She left Wyoming, went east when the war ended. Thought she'd find something better. I stayed. Married soon after." The blade glinted in the firelight. "She'd look at this cabin and call it a trap. Say I'm wasting time with a man who barely speaks and a stove that smokes if you breathe wrong." He set the knife down gently. "Is that what you think?" She turned toward him then, her voice low. No, he didn't blink. "Then what do you think?" She stepped closer, her hands loose at her sides. "I think you've given my children more peace in a month than I could in the past year. I think you see more than you say. And I think I've stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop when you walk through that door." The weight of her words settled between them, heavy and warm. He stood, slow but sure, and crossed to her. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the heat from his skin. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "But if you stay, I thought maybe, in time, we might build something together." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to be another burden you carry." "You're not," he said. "Not once. Not ever." She stood very still. And then, for the first time, she reached for his hand. He took it gently, his fingers calloused, careful. Outside, the snow fell soft and silent. Inside, something rooted itself deeper than words. Penelope didn't sleep much that night. She lay awake listening to Daniel breathe, to the fire crackle. And when the sun rose pale over the hills, she watched it from the window, Kellen's coat draped across the chair behind her. She'd write to her sister, thank her, tell her she was well. But she wouldn't be leaving. Not now. Not when her heart had finally found shelter. A week after the letter arrived, Penelope took Daisy and Daniel into the hills just beyond the pasture, where the snow had begun to crust with a silvery sheen under the sun. She carried a woven basket and a small spade, while the children chased each other in slow circles, bundled and laughing, their boots scuffing up flurries of powdered snow. Beneath a bare cottonwood, she knelt and dug carefully, searching near the trunk's base where she remembered wild onions grew in spring and sometimes lingered through the early cold. She found a few thin, pale things, but enough to flavor broth. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stood. "You're quiet," Kellen said that evening as he ladled stew into bowls. He'd added bits of venison and dried corn from the stores, and the onions she'd found gave the pot a sharpness that filled the cabin with a welcome scent. Penelope sat on the bench, her eyes on the fire. "I've been thinking about what you said, about building something together." He set the bowl before her and sat across from her, waiting. "I never pictured it before," she said. "After Henry died, I couldn't see past the next day. Then the days got longer, harder. I stopped trying to imagine anything else." "Some days are like that," he said. "They take more than they give." She lifted her spoon, then paused. "You're not the kind of man who says things unless he means them." "No. Then I need to be honest, too." She set the spoon down. "I'm afraid of wanting more. It's easier to expect nothing. That way nothing can break." Kellen looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I used to think like that. After Clara passed, I didn't speak to another soul for near a year. Lived off jerky and rainwater. Thought I'd serve out my time alone and quiet." She didn't flinch at the name. "And now I watch you tie Daisy's boots before she goes out. I see Daniel climb into your lap like there's nowhere safer. and I think maybe life's giving me another turn at it. Penelope's fingers curled around the edge of the bowl. I don't want to be taken in just because you're lonely. You're not, he said, firm but low. You're here because I want you here, and I don't want a shadow of something lost. I want what's standing in front of me. The room had grown quiet, save for the wind brushing against the cabin's walls. I never had a man see me before, she said. Not past what I could do for him. Not like this. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached across the table, not bold, not hesitant, and placed his hand over hers. That night she lay in bed, the children deep in sleep beside her, and she listened to the breath of the house. The boards creaking as they settled, the wind sifting through the chinks where daub had thinned, the soft scrape of Kellen's boots as he moved near the hearth. She didn't rise, but she didn't close her eyes either. The next morning, she opened the door to find a wooden cradle on the porch. Simple, well-made, the joints clean, the wood sanded smooth. Beside it, a folded scrap of canvas with her name written in charcoal, and nothing else. She ran her hand over the cradle's top rail, then stepped back inside. Kellen was by the stove refilling the kettle. You build that? She asked. He didn't turn. Had some pine left. Figured you might need somewhere to lay Daniel down when you're working. She stepped across the room, rested her hand against the small of his back. You're not trying to prove anything, are you? No, he said. Just trying to make things easier. She leaned into his side, just enough to feel the warmth of him. He didn't move away. I've made my decision, she said. About staying. He looked down at her, slow and steady. And, she nodded. I want to build with you, if you're still offering. I am. Outside, the snow began to melt in thin rivulets down the slope. The air held a different kind of cold, not sharp, but soft, like winter beginning to loosen its grip. Inside the cabin, Penelope reached for Kellen's hand without hesitation. They stood like that, fire crackling low, the scent of pine sap rising from the cradle by the door, and for the first time in years her heart felt settled. Not surviving, living. The first thaw brought mud and the smell of damp bark, and with it came the sound of water moving again, slow trickles under the crusted snow, the creek beginning to stir. Kellen hitched the mule to the cart and hauled winter's ash down the slope to scatter it near the fence line, where ice still clung to the north-facing roots. Penelope stood on the porch, brushing Daisy's hair as the girl squirmed under her hand. Daniel sat on a wool blanket nearby, busy with a length of twine and a pine cone he'd found under the eaves. The sun was just warm enough to coax a flush onto their cheeks. You think the ground'll be ready by next week? She asked as Kellen paused at the gate. He rubbed the back of his neck. Might be. I'll turn the soil near the shed first. See how deep the frost still runs. You got plans for that patch? Carrots. Maybe beets if there's enough sun. He nodded and pushed the cart forward again without another word. She watched him for a moment, then turned back to Daisy's tangled hair. That evening, after the children were asleep, Penelope opened the chest at the foot of the bed and pulled out a folded bundle. She laid it across the table and unwrapped it. A soft blue dress with mended seams, her mother's brooch pinned at the collar. It was the only fine thing she had left. Kellen sat by the stove, sharpening his awl with deliberate strokes. I was thinking, she said, smoothing the dress with both hands. We might head into town come Sunday. Daisy's been asking after the church bell again. He set the awl down. You sure? I am. Been over 3 months since we came here. It's time folks saw we're still standing. He leaned back in his chair. We'll take the wagon. You wear that, you'll turn every head from here to the mercantile. She glanced up. You think I'm looking to turn heads? No, he said. But I think you deserve to be seen. She folded the dress again, slower this time. I never asked you what brought you to Rollins in the first place. I worked cattle near Laramie before the war, then freight roads. When things got loud, I moved west, found a patch of land that didn't ask much from me. And now, he looked at her straight on. Now I want something that asks more. She felt her heart catch. You sure? I've never been more. They made the trip to town that Sunday. Kellen wore his cleanest shirt, and Penelope pinned her hair back with a ribbon Daisy had found in an old sewing tin. The children sat close in the wagon, bundled and bright-eyed. At the chapel, the preacher greeted them with a wary nod. But Penelope noticed the way folks softened when Daisy smiled or Daniel reached out a chubby hand. Kellen stood beside her, his fingers brushing hers where their hands rested on the bench. He didn't speak during the hymns, but he stayed through all of them. After the service, a woman in a dark shawl approached, her hands clasped. "You're the Easton widow," she said to Penelope. "I remember you from the cattle census 2 summers back." Penelope nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Heard you'd gone east. I thought about it," she said. "But I stayed." The woman looked between her and Kellen, then down at the children. "Well, we could use another pair of steady hands come spring. I help run the schoolhouse. You think on that?" "I will." They rode home in easy quiet. As the land rolled past, Penelope leaned against Kellen's shoulder, watching the hills soften under the sun. Daniel slept in her lap. Daisy hummed a tune no one recognized. That night, after the children were settled, Kellen pulled a small box from the cupboard and set it on the table. "I carved this for you," he said. "Took a while." She opened the lid. Inside lay a ring, shaped from antler and inlaid with a strip of polished jasper. Simple, strong. "I know it's not much," he said. "It's everything," she whispered. He didn't kneel. He didn't have to. "I want to build a life with you. Not just a roof and a stove, but everything that comes with it. You and the children. All of it." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Yes," she said. "Yes." They married under the cottonwood in late spring, with the creek running strong below the ridge. Daisy wore flowers in her hair. Daniel carried a pine cone in his fist and refused to let it go. The preacher from town came out with a Bible and a smile, and when he asked if they promised to love and to keep, they both answered steady and sure. That summer, Penelope planted carrots near the shed, and beets too. Kellen built a second bed for the children and added a lean-to for the mule. On warm evenings, they sat on the porch together, watching the children chase fireflies through the grass. And when the days grew long and golden, and the wind softened to a whisper, Penelope would rest her head on Kellen's shoulder and feel the quiet joy of a life not just survived, but chosen. Together, they grew something lasting made not of grand words or promises, but of steady days, earned trust, and 2 hearts that had learned to beat again side by side. The road behind them had been long, but the one ahead was theirs.